Hi, good afternoon. Welcome. You're watching MF Corner. I'm Sumaira Abdi. On the show today, we're going to talk about what are the rules of redemptions for mutual funds. Mohit Gang, co-founder and CEO of Moneyfront, will join us. And a little bit later on the show, we're going to answer some viewer queries that have been coming in. And we'll also talk about what's the difference between an ETF and an ETP. But that's coming up later. First up, the rules of redemptions. Mohit Gang, good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining in. When we tell people to analyze their portfolios or to review their portfolios, the suggestion that's given is that it should be done on a periodic basis, right? Therefore, should there be some rules to redemption? Should people not be agnostic to market lows and market highs? I mean, why this school of thought that because the market is at a high, people should consider whether or not they need to redeem some of their funds?
Hi, Sumaira. Good afternoon. So I'll try and answer this with a famous quote from Peter Lynch, who says that far more money has been lost by investors preparing for corrections and anticipating for corrections than has been lost in corrections themselves. And that's actually the sad tale of investors. They try and rejig their portfolios depending on market levels, timing, entries and exit. And that's when investors tend to lose more money. To my mind, an exit or a rebalancing perhaps has to be very well timed and has to be very well planned, and it can only be done in proportion to what your predetermined asset allocation has been. So let's say if an investor decided to be 50% equity and 50% debt, and because of whatever has been the market movement, the equity component has gone up to 60% now. Now is the time when he should actually go ahead and trim down that 10% of equity and bring his overall allocation to 50 debt and 50 equity again, right? And not just because the markets have run up, one has to do this. One has to not do this at 6 months or 1 year. They can actually plan a periodicity, but the better way to do is to plan a level. So if 50-50 was the level, they can plan that at every 5% or every 10% movement, they will try and do this exercise of rebalancing. And that, to my mind, is a more apt way of going about the entire process.
So basically, the intent is not to redeem for the sake of redemption. The intent is to redeem for the sake of rebalancing your portfolio, right?
Absolutely. So you can't just go ahead because markets have run up, and markets will time and again prove you wrong or right, either ways, right? You can't just keep chasing the markets. The other way is the more appropriate and the fundamental way of doing it, where you try and rebalance your allocations towards various assets. And if you take this one level down, Sumaira, let's say if you decided that equity has run up by 10% and your overall allocation has to be 50-50, then under that 10% trimming of equity, you have to actually figure out what your subcategory allocations were. So if large cap was 50%, multi was 30, mid and small were 10 each. And let's say two of these, let's say mid and small, have run up quite a bit and are over allocated now. Let's say 10 has moved down to 13 and 15% respectively. Then you trim those allocations and get them back in sync to what was the predetermined allocation. And that is the right way of doing it, actually.
Okay, Mohit, I take your the overarching theme, which is that redeem, unless you have a requirement, redeem only for the sake of maintaining the asset allocation. I take that point. What happens sometimes is that, there is a non-functional portfolio, or that your strategy has changed. How do you choose between the various products? Like, what do you redeem first? I mean, is there some sort of a waterfall that you should follow?
Yeah. So let's say once you've decided out of which category of equity you have to redeem, then the question comes down to which scheme should you redeem, or what particular holding should you redeem. Let's say from the previous example, I'll continue. Let's say in mid and small, you had 3 schemes each, and now you want to decide which one to come out of. The best way to do is to track the performance of each of these schemes against the peer group and benchmark indices both, and plot them for at least 3 to 5 years, not just for last 6 months or 1 year. To my mind, that's actually the most absurd way of tracking a scheme, just by going by the recent performance. Do it for the 3 or 5 year period. Don't track the performance of the scheme from your own timing of entry, right? That's again a very incorrect way of doing it. Track the overall performance of the scheme for 3 to 5 years and then see what has to be taken out. The most fundamental rule out here, which most of the investors tend to ignore, is that you have to water the flowers and cut the weed. And the reverse actually happens in the market. And I've seen this in many times that investors will come and say कि अच्छा यहाँ profit हो रहा है and I should just take out my profits. No, that's actually wrong. You should take out the schemes which have been underperforming and which have not been doing well, and not the ones which are generating profits for you. So water the flowers and cut the weeds. So you have to cut the losers actually.
Okay, Mohit, the other confusion that sometimes happens in people's mind is that, when we say do your asset allocation or, review it, rebalance it, etc., some take redemption to mean redemption in the true sense, that you sell your holdings. Some take it to mean that you stop your SIP. Is there really this big a difference? And, what is it that people should not do? What not to do when you're considering redemption in your portfolio?
Okay, so basically there are few golden rules which you should try and follow, or few mistakes which you should try and avoid. And I think I'll try and sequence it out. The first one to my mind is that you should avoid redeeming a scheme under short-term capital gains or under an exit load period, because that signifies that you have actually not given enough time to the scheme, right? That's number one. Number two, basically, is that you have to go down the ladder, which is get the asset allocation right, get the subcategory allocation right, and weed out the schemes which are underperforming or losers, basically, right? And number three is you should also see what your taxation is overall. How does it? You have 1 lakh rupee of gains which are exempt, so you should try and work out your redemptions to a manner that you make the most of it. You should also see your set-offs. Basically, that if you are taking a loss in one of the positions, can you set it off against the other position? And I think all those things have to be kept in mind. One specific thing which you asked, Sumaira, I just lost the thread. Sorry.
No, where people actually redeem, or when they consider just stopping their SIP instead of redeeming.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. So basically, look, I think that's a most fundamental question actually, and my mind is an equity flow is an equity flow. If you're redeeming out of equity and simultaneously you're also putting money into equity, then it doesn't serve the overall purpose. I think if you are willing to cut down your allocation, then you have to first stop your SIPs or stop your fresh allocations, rejig your allocation, define what has to be done in terms of overall limits, and then perhaps try and see, once you are under allocated to equities, then you should again start with an SIP approach or a lump sum approach, right? SIP and lump sum are just approaches. If you are going underweight equities, then you have to stop your SIPs, and post stopping, then you have to go about redeeming. You can't redeem at one side and you can't be putting on the other side. So that's like a no-go zone for me.
But Mohit, one more point you mentioned, that redeem the losers first, right? Don't exit your winning positions easily. But the best performing funds themselves keep rotating, right? I read this very interesting study which was done over a 10-year period, where the best performing fund of 2014 to 16 was ranked 230 in 2017 to 2019. The best performing fund of the next 2 years did not feature in the top 25 list, in the next 10 years. The best performing fund of 2013 to 15 was ranked 39 in 2016-18. I can go on and on, right? Therefore, how do you know when your fund has run its course, and therefore when do you exit?
Right. So look, I think, and that's very aptly pointed out by you. A fund will never run the same course or the same speed in the next 6 months as it did in the last 6 months. And it's a fundamental rule. All your winners keep changing and keep rotating, and more so in asset classes. But look, you don't have any predefined way or formula to figure out which one will be the next winner in next 6 months or next 1 year, right? Only way you can keep doing this right is that you track the long-term performance of your holdings, which is at least 3 to 5 years of performance consistently against the peer group and against the benchmark both. And if the fund has been consistently beating it, if it's a quartile 1 performer, you need not be the topper in the class always. You need not be the first ranker or the second ranker. If you're the quartile 1 performer fund, then the fund is good to stay the course, basically. But consistently, if you figure out that the fund has been lagging as a quartile 3rd or quartile 4th performer for 3 to 5 years time frame regularly, then there is an alarm bell, and you need to then take action on that, right? You can't just chop off your winners, because ideally that's the wrong way of going about it. Because if someone is winning battles for you, you might as well feed him more.
Okay, Mohit, thanks very much for joining in. So, this is a subject that every investor also needs to sort of dip their toes into and see how it works for them. But thanks very much, Mohit, for introducing the concept of, how there are certain rules for redemption. And, it's not just you wake up one morning and you take a pick and choose to redeem that fund. There's a certain scientific way to go about, the process that will perhaps make the most sense. Mohit, thanks very much. A quick break for now on the